So this is what do we do? What about dreams and visions 2? So in if you haven't seen Dreams and Visions 1, check that out. This is an adjunct to that, an addition. I don't know how long the video will be, and I will need to refer to some notes I made. I typically, in every other video I've done, it just shoots from start to finish with no notes taking, no forethought or plan. But in this one, I wanted to just make sure I covered a couple of details that are important to people, because I think if you watch Dreams and Visions 1 carefully, you will come out of that video knowing that that lots of people in our spiritual community have dreams and visions, and that we do value them, but that we take them all with a grain of salt due to the uncertain nature of where they come from, and how they've been added to by our own mind, and also that's probably it right there. Just where did they come from? We don't know for sure. Can't know that it came from God for sure. And that history is just littered with just terrible disasters that have come about from people who assume that when they sit and pray for guidance, everything that comes to their mind after they've prayed comes from God. And that the apophatic approach of Christian spirituality towards visions allows us to just take all of that with a grain of salt and not give it that divine weight of authority. But then we also talked about in the first video how, but we do know we get visions from God. We can be reasonably certain some do. And I don't know how many, there's going to be a whole, on this channel, I'm going to do an entire playlist called Experiences, where people from the community write in some of the sometimes profound mystical experiences they've had. And so, because I think when we start saying, look, you can't know this vision came from God, you can't know this message came from God, you can't know this intuition came from God, I think some people are going to hear something that wasn't said. I think some people are going to hear that we don't believe God speaks that way ever. And no one I know believes that. In fact, I think I said this in the first video also, but I know a lot of people that have had some pretty profound visionary experiences. I have a friend who was practicing a certain form of spirituality, and he was meditating 6 hours a day. But he felt like something was missing in his spirituality, and he decided, I'm not going to leave my living room. I'm going to sit in this circle, and I'm not going to leave this circle until I know what it is. And he had he wasn't asleep, he had a profound encounter with Jesus. His ceiling opened up, Jesus Christ came down through the ceiling, took him by the hand, took him up into heaven. He, kind of like Paul, he didn't know if his body went or if he just had a mystical experience. He doesn't know what happened there. And then he was, the plan of salvation from Jesus Christ was revealed to him, and he became a Christian after that. So that's pretty profound. That happened. So our apophatic approach does not deny the reality of mystical experience at all. It just says we try not to assign direct. We try not to say this vision came from God for sure. We allow some skepticism in there because we know that people are often wrong, and that we ourselves are going to be just like other people, and we're going to be wrong sometimes, and that there is no perfect way to get direct answers from God. So that's that. That's the first video, but I would watch it because it goes into much more detail, and it's really good. And I think it's really important because the attitude towards visions and mystical experiences in Christianity, the apophatic attitude that is somewhat skeptical, it preserves something. And what it's preserving is sort of God, actually, because it should be obvious to everybody. I mean, I don't know how many people everyone who watches these videos knows. I've known hundreds of people over the years, and I've known a lot of people that are talking directly to God, and I've known a whole bunch of those people that 20 years later it is very clear they were not talking to God. and that information was false, and they based their lives on that information, and it didn't pan out for them. It panned out terribly. I remember just, when I first got on the path, I was in the New Age, and everyone around me was too, and it was such an exciting time, and we're all meditating and reading all the whatever books they're reading, and there was this group of guys I knew that were really serious about meditating and everything, and I was thinking of going to college, and I said, hey, I think I'm going to go to college, and this one guy said, well, what for? And I said, well, I just, I think I want to study, I think it was at the time maybe some biology and physics. Not to get a degree in that, but I just wanted to learn about those subjects because I thought it's part of creation, and so I could learn more about God by understanding creation. It just seemed like a neat thing. And he said, well, I think that's a waste of time. And I said, why? And he said, because we know for sure, I don't remember the date he gave, it was something like 1998. We know for sure the second coming and the end of the world is in 1998, so you're wasting your time going to college. He said that. He said that with a straight face. They were all laying on the couch talking about God together, which is fine. Well, 1998 came and went. And that was false. And think about, that's just one example, but there are so many. Another one, I was teaching a meditation class once. And a woman came in, and in my groups, typically I let everyone have a chance to share, after we've meditated, and if any instruction has been given, then after that, anyone has a chance to share. So this woman spoke up and said, I just want to tell you what my higher self told me today. It's important. It's okay, this was when I was from the New Age, and I didn't get uncomfortable yet when she just said that much. Now I wouldn't even want her to speak in my class. But at the time, I was much more open in that way, and so I didn't even care. She just spoke. And what she said was that stalagtites, the ones that hang off of the ceiling, off of the top of the cave, and are formed by water dripping down and leaving particles. Stalactites are actually unicorn horns that ancient peoples cemented to the ceiling, and they all contain information that is vitally important to our spiritual growth. She said that with a straight face, and she was dead serious, and she heard that in mystical experience, and that's obviously not true. So those are some pretty extreme examples, but I could really now go down a list of 100 things I've heard just like it. And these are people that are sincere, they pray and meditate, they're doing their very best, but they've been convinced through some instruction or other that if you're sincere and you ask God direct questions, you'll get direct, true answers. And, that's that. I don't think I should have to say much more. But we do get visions and we do get experiences. And how do you navigate that? And so our skeptical approach. So what I wanted to say in this video, I'm just checking out now, one of the things we're trying to preserve by having a certain skepticism for visions, and not just visions, but intuition and all of that, is this part of God that exists deeper than all of the senses, and deeper than all spiritual experiences too. And I know this is a foreign concept for people that are not involved in Christian spirituality. And all that I can tell you, because I only have a certain penetration into this reality, is that there is definitely a way of connecting with God that is completely non-sensory. I mean the physical senses, but I also mean the spiritual senses. That there is a way to connect to God that is a real connection, that is transformative, and that is pure, that is really clean. And it exists at a deeper, the way the monk that I go to see talks about it, it exists, that this connection exists at a level deeper than all of the senses. Now, that doesn't mean you don't ever feel God's presence. It doesn't mean you don't have experiences. We're not saying those things then don't happen. except during certain periods of purification when God is trying to purify those sensory means of connecting with God. God is trying to purify the soul so that its primary anchor is on a level of connection to God that is deeper than anything that can be interpreted. Right? Because words come, you have to interpret them. A vision comes, you must interpret it. A sign comes, you must interpret its meaning. Even if a message is very clear, it's still coming through through our senses, it's coming through language, it's coming through symbology, coming through images. And all of that is fine, but what Christian spirituality has discovered is that under all of that, deeper than all of that, is a kind of connection to God that requires no filtering at all. And I mean, I'm just doing my best here to say it because I get that this is a very obscure concept, and I think most people have never heard of it. And so I get that it's kind of it's like, whoa, that's out of left field. I've read a lot of books, I've never heard of this. All I can tell you is that it's really common knowledge in Christian spirituality. That there's this way to be open to God where we are actually being touched by God and changed, and the proof is in the change it produces. We're being touched and changed by God in a way that has no sensory input whatsoever. And this is the preferred and primary method. Why would it be preferred and primary? Well, precisely because it's so direct. Precisely because you can't get your mind wrapped around it and turn it into something it isn't. You can't get your ego wrapped around in it because you can't see it coming. You can't get your hopes and desires and aspirations and fears interacting with it because it's all done in secret. Now, lots of people I know still have visions and things like that. Not usually during the period of purification where God is trying to wean them off of those sensory experiences with God. But people who've been purified in that way and then come to the other side, some of that comes back. There's still visions to be had. There's still dreams to be dreamt, right? There's still intuition to be followed. All of that is there. But now it's irrelevant to the soul that's been through that purification because they know for sure the transformation is happening. Vision or no vision, message or no message. It's all coming anyway. And so it's a much deeper anchor point. And you can tell that it's much deeper once you get it. So Christianity, this skeptical apophatic approach to theology and this skeptical apophatic approach to messages, and language and words about God and labels, it extends, is all we're saying, to our own mystical encounter. Okay, so so we're preserving a deeper connection with God, which is completely unnoticeable when there's noise going on, right? In noise, I mean even now sensory noise. It's preserving this other deeper thing, and we have a word for it. And if I'm talking to Christians, you love the word. If I'm talking to people that are new to this approach, they're going to hate this word. And so I'm like, do I say the word or don't I say the word? The word we have for this is faith. But don't think of it just for now at all. Let's not talk about this other part of faith that is true, that we use. Faith in Scripture. Faith in revelation. And I do have faith in Scripture and revelation, but we're not talking about that now. We're talking about this other kind of faith that anyone could relate to, even if they're not Christian at all. Anyone could plug into if they're not Christian even. And this kind of faith it's a radical openness to God. Okay, here's my openness to God. It's this big. That's when I'm tuned into a specific sensory experience with God. If I open it a little more, it receives more information. And if I open it a little more, it receives more information. And if I open it a little more, it receives more information. And there's a way to be so wide open, okay? So wide open that you're receiving everything God is doing all at the same time, but at a level you can't notice, and that is called faith. And it is a real opening. It's not blind trust that has no result. And I've talked about this in other videos. Faith without works is dead. And this kind of faith, you open up, you feel nothing, but you start to know God is there even when you don't feel it. And you start to know that a solution is coming even when you don't feel it. And you actually just start to abide in a knowing that it's all there. And you just don't worry anymore. You have it all. That's deeper. It's much deeper than messages, visions, dreams, intuitions, divinations, just whatever you get into. It's so much more than all of that. But it's not exclusive to that. You can have both. The problem is humans cling to the obvious, and the more subtle it is, until it's so subtle you can't notice it. That degree of subtlety, we just miss. We don't cling to that, but it's where the deepest and surest path lies. Okay, so that's why the apophatic approach, to preserve our relationship with God, to preserve our transformation, and to preserve the sacred nature even of a true vision that comes, and to make it easier to discern between false and authentic intuitions and mystical experiences. So, okay, so it's I'm just checking my notes. It's a starting point. It's not. Okay. Okay. So this isn't something you just have to say you believe in order to be Christian. Sometimes you catch people just saying it because they're supposed to say it, but you know they don't believe it. So then it's like, oh, that's dead religion. Don't do that. You don't have to follow this path. Don't do it if you don't want to do it. You don't have to adopt this attitude if you don't want to. If you really have it, you really do come with a fundamental skepticism of all mystical encounters, including your own. It's not a threat to anything. You actually feel more secure because you have learned that your connection with God is way more sure than whether you're feeling God's presence or not. You've come to a knowing, a deep knowing, that you have God with you. And you know you have it when you don't feel God's presence. And you know you have it when you don't get intuitions. You know you have it when you're not having visions. You know you have it. And you know it's coming, not just blindly believing, but because you can look back and see that it just keeps transforming you. This is a kind of sureness that's best. So that's the foundation. Okay, that's what the first video was all about. But then, let's say someone has that foundation. This is the trickier part to talk about. It's not easy to talk about because you'll think we're contradicting what we say. Okay, so I really do have that foundation. I really deeply don't need visions anymore. They just don't matter. I don't care. I mean, they come. I still get stuff like that, but I don't care. I just don't care. But they do come, and they have been coming, right? And I also know other people that they've been coming for a long time. And for certain, some of them were dead true. I mean, dead true. And provided guidance in moments. But how do you allow a vision to guide you if you don't believe it came from God? Right? How do you do that? Well, here's what you do. First of all, some of them seem more likely to come from God than others, right? So our assumption is we don't assume they came from God. We never assume they didn't, right? The assumption is we just don't assume they came from God. We just don't assign divine authority to them, right? But I hope this is an okay analogy. But think about if you were just sitting in a room of, 5 or 6 super wise men and women, very wise, right? And think of a vision like this. You're sitting in this room, no one's talking. You come to a place in your life where you're sitting with them, and one of them pops up with a really good idea, with a suggestion or an idea. And it seems really good, and they're kind of wise, but they don't know everything. The one over here might disagree, right? But this person said this. That's like receiving a vision. Somebody said something to you. And then you just get to, I don't want to belabor this point, but you don't assume that came from God or an angel. But you just assume you did just have a freaking vision or a really strong intuition, right? Can you act on that and still be following this apophatic approach? Of course you can. Yes, you can. I do all day long. Just so you know, I operate, I think, primarily intuitively. I think intuition is the primary way that I operate. I don't think everyone's like that. I think there's a lot of ways to operate through life that are just as good as any other. But I'm very apophatic about all this. I'm very skeptical. And yet, I think I operate primarily through intuition. But what I just don't do is I just don't say God is talking directly to me. And then when I act on what intuition brings, I don't assume I'm acting under God's direction. That allows me to be wrong, right? And that's really good. But there's another thing it does. And, talking about the damage I've seen when people trust this stuff as if it came right from the mouth of God, the damage that can be done. Here's a great damage. I've seen people really angry at God later because God told them to marry that person, and God told them clearly they would be happily married if they married this person, and then they married this person, and they turned out to be a monster. Didn't know, profoundly narcissistic or abusive, and and they had kids, and then the kids were harmed by it, and ended in divorce, but they were told they'd be happily married if they married this person by God. And now I don't know, there's so many people that I've worked with over the years that have said, why would God have told me to do this? And I think it's really sad that, how do you answer that to somebody? In the moment, they're just hurting, But what they need is a complete overhaul in the way they view all of life. Because they should have never assumed God told them in the first place. Now, a gut feeling, a warm feeling in the heart with an idea that drops in, that's, that could be wrong all the time. In fact, that kind of intuition really just serves the will. But it's not even really directly linked to God. It can be, but it isn't by nature directly linked to God at all. It's just an intuitive ability. I had a doctor friend who knew a businessman who really was a Satanist. And I don't know what a Satanist is really into, but this person really was a Satanist. And they had somewhat nefarious, according to my doctor friend, somewhat nefarious ends in mind, at least profoundly selfish ends. And my friend said that this person he knew had spent years developing and honing his intuition so he could use it against people in business deals. This person was a businessman. And he used his ability to read auras and his ability to read people and all of his abilities. He used them to really sort of prey on others in this somewhat nefarious way. That proves right there intuition is not just like directly linked to God. It's really just a faculty people have. And it can be linked to God, and sometimes is, but it's not automatic. So intuition that comes in is not automatically true, but there are other experiences that are more likely to be true. I mean, if you enter into blinding white light right? Lose all remembrance of yourself and your personal desires and egoic motives completely. If you forget you're even human for a while and then you have a vision, that's more likely to be true than the feeling you get when you ask for an answer while you're driving down the road, right? It's a little more likely to be true. But it could still be wrong. It totally could still be wrong, but it's more likely. And then so in Christian spirituality, some experiences are given like a higher likelihood of being directly from God, and some are given a lower. But that's that. So now, but you can still have that fundamental attitude, and then operate intuitively and spiritually throughout your day. And in fact, you probably should. And I was just going to bring one example from my life. It's not a vision or anything, but I formed a band, and the band is called Ghost of Earnest Pitch, which is code. It's Ghost of Earnest Pitch, and it's code for sort of like the Holy Spirit of sincere devotion. But I wanted the band to be completely intuition based. So here's someone who's apophatic, who's very skeptical of mystical experience, who started a band completely devoted to mystical experience. So we have like 6 people in the band. We play music. I don't know if we're very good, but it does have a certain something to it. It's really neat. It's really kind of spiritual. But our intent is we sit down to play, and none of us have any idea what we're going to play. We just start. And we set this intention. We'd love for God to play through us. And we settle down into a meditative state, and we surrender our desires and any hopes to be neat or show off or impressive or a star. And we sort of like set up this intention to be collaborative musicians in this circle, and that we will allow God's power to come through us and make music. Now I think that is at least a decent example of believing in intuition and God's ability to play through you and create through you and flow through you and flow through a group and bring a whole group into some kind of union. And this is the experiment that we play out every time we play music. We unless we've written a song that we rehearse, we have no plan whatsoever when we sit down to play in front of people. We don't even know what key we're going to be in until we start. Then we just go from there. So I hope that anyone that listened to the first video and now listening to this video hear that we are flying by the seat of our intuitive capacities here, by the seat of our creative capacities, by the seat of our body knowing. We're trusting our ability to navigate and come together as a band, as one, when there's no preconceived plan to go off of. And we can be apophatic and do that. We can not assume we played every note just the way God wanted it played. In fact, it's easy to see we don't. In fact, the opposite has become quite apparent. We're giving it our very best shot. There's no doubt that you can feel this power sort of bringing us into some places that we do find where an order happens that is, and a timing happens that is beautiful and a real pleasure to be a part of. But seeing that happen also lets us know how long it takes to get there. And then over time, seeing how that there gets better over time, it shows us how far off we are from hearing and doing exactly what God says to hear and do. That's life. That's you and that's me. So are you in communication with God? Of course you are, certainly. Can you know, though, that every word, thought, and deed that comes through you is a direct message from God? No. In fact, it's best to assume, here's my take. Every day I try to only do God's will. I mean, I surrender over time as deeply as possible, and I try to surrender specific days to God, and I just want to do God's will. Even this video, 10, 15 minutes of just prayer. Let me let go of what I think. Let me just say what God wants to say. That's my best shot. But I never, ever assume any one thing I've said is like God's will directly. I just never assume that. And that leads me to just one other thing. I ended up not looking at my notes enough, so that I'll probably make a version 3. But the last thing I want to say is, so here's a story, a story about the monk that I work with. It's a great story. So the monk that I work with was in a monastery here in Utah. And they were closing the monastery. The monks had gotten elderly and they were no longer in a position to take care of themselves, and they were going to need care. And so at first, the notion was all the monks were going to go to Kentucky. This is the way I remember it. And so my spiritual director, who is pretty wise and kind of profoundly, he's just got he's got a certain something that is unique. I've been really grateful to know him. And he just has a really good discernment about things. If you're off, he can tell. He doesn't give a lot of specifics. He'll just say, I don't know about that, but he's always right with that stuff. So, he's going to Kentucky. I wouldn't then have a spiritual director or a confessor to just confess all my sin to, which is, I think, very important. I love having that. I always want to have somebody I could just tell the worst about me to and be honest about it before God and a person, And so I was on this international Catholic website, and Catholics from all over the world, but also all over the country. And I asked about possibly finding a spiritual director who was quite advanced. We have a map, so we know it. We have a map, so we know what it looks like to be in union with God, and we know the stages in between, and so there's sort of some ways to tell where you're at a little. There's huge caveats to that, but so I asked the question. I'm losing my spiritual director soon. I'm interested in finding someone who's quite advanced. I'm willing to travel, a few states every once in a while to go see them. Does anyone have suggestions? And no one really did, but a guy PM'd me and he said, hey, come talk to me in private, in a private message, and there's someone I know. I said, great. So here's what he said. I know of a monk who can read souls. Now this guy didn't know where I was. He didn't know where I lived or anything. It's a website. You don't tell people where you live. He said there's a guy, and he said his name, and I can't say his name, but it was the monk I work with. He said there's a guy in Utah that can read souls, a monk, and he said his name, and it was my guy. So I said, okay, I'm not looking for a spiritual director. That seems like a message, right? I'm not assuming that came directly from God, but I'm going to listen to that. I'm going to take that as guidance. But I'm going to take responsibility if it isn't guidance, because I made the choice, right? So then anyway, the monk ended up not moving to Kentucky. He ended up staying here, and he's here to this day. So I still have access to him. So, this monk is the spiritual director that I use, and he's highly intuitive. And if he wanted to set up with tarot cards, he could be a psychic kind of a thing, if that's how he wanted to bill it. But what I've learned from him is just great. So what he never does, he never says God is saying this. He never says that. Now, he's got some gifts, clearly. But he never says, an angel told me to tell you this. God told me to tell you this. He never claims divine authority, ever. He just says, have you thought about this? What do you think of that? That sounds like monkey business to me. That doesn't sound accurate. Now, he's floating in the same place, I think a better place really, but he's floating in the same place that an extremely intuitive and spiritually advanced person from somewhere else is floating in. But that other person may be claiming divine authority behind their message, and the monk isn't. And that is better by a huge stretch. So if you watch the first video and then you watch this video, please never get the impression you are not now intuitive if you've come to know yourself to be intuitive. Never get that impression that you don't have a connection to God if you've come to know yourself to have a connection to God. Of course you do. I believe you. But it just keeps it sane. It just keeps it sane and mellow and quieter and more stable. And it allows us to make many less assumptions about divine authority in relationship to what we know and what we experience. And this creates more freedom. And then any intuition or vision or anything that comes our way can come our way, and we can assess it as adults and say, okay, I had this vision. I've had a couple of pretty profound visions, and I think one was 15 years ago. And I've been apophatic about it the whole time. It was a very profound vision, though. I mean, it was very direct and pretty powerful, as powerful an experience maybe as I've ever had in my life. But I still took it apophatically, of course, just maybe, maybe, we'll see. And it contained a lot of information that I'm not at liberty to share. I don't like to share that kind of thing, but it contained a lot of information that at the time was 100% irrelevant to my life. 100%. And it's interesting. This vision stuck in my brain in a way that I could never forget it. It's as clear as day. It might have even been 18 years ago. It's been a long time. And it's clear as day, stuck in my mind, very vibrant. I can see it clearly now. And none of its content became relevant for at least 4 years after the vision. And then the first thing that I was told in the vision became relevant. And it, how can I say this to keep true to apophaticism? It's like I was in a period of temptation and didn't know for sure I was in a period of temptation to get involved in a particular part of life that is not sinful, that is fine. And in the vision, it had told me not to do that. And so I still did a little. I don't know that vision is true, but I thought, it's telling me not to, maybe. Let me just be careful here as I enter this area. And you know what I found is I found that for me, that area of life would have held me back spiritually, even though it's not sinful in any way. Even though someone else could have gotten involved in that and it could have helped their spirituality. And then that period ended, and the period of temptation where I felt drawn to that part of life ended, and I moved on. And then there was another piece that came in with this vision telling me not to get involved in another area of life. And I did anyway. But that was there to say, hey, don't get involved in that. And I got involved, but I felt, and again, nothing sinful, another area of life that someone else could be called by God to enter into. But that vision told me not to. And so as I got involved in it, I thought, let me just really pay attention and be careful here. And it kept me from getting way more involved because I really wanted to leap into this area of life and try to make a difference in the world. But this vision had told me not to. And so I didn't. And this is almost present day now. That aspect of the vision turned out to be absolutely accurate. And I can see now from the facts on the ground, the way that area of life has unfolded, that it would have been an utter waste of my energies to be involved. And it would have been. The endeavor that I wanted to enter into utterly failed, and it wouldn't have been me that fixed it and made it succeed. It was an endeavor with hundreds of thousands, people involved. Okay, so that vision was right there, and it was right in the past. And then there was another element of that vision that came 15 or 18 years ago, that is also right now playing out. I can watch it playing out in life, and it's really clear. And there's more that I was told in the vision to prepare for whatever's coming in my life, and I can see it coming. Now, I've been able to use that vision has kept me on track. I think it has helped me not get lost. But I didn't have to say this is directly from God in order to do that. I just had to listen to the wisdom in it and consider it as an adult, right? Just as a careful, conscientious adult who wants to do what's right. I can hold, and there's several things like that in my life that have been guiding factors. So no, I'm not saying in any way you've never had a vision and that all your visions are false. But what I'm saying is, just as well as there are those like that are so far 100% true, there's only 2 more pieces of information that vision gave me that are waiting to unfold. I think it's astounding. And I have to say, when I had the vision, none of it was relevant at all to my life. At all. None of it. I didn't know any of that was coming into my life, or that I would develop an interest in these areas. There was no way I could have seen that coming. So that's pretty profound. I think that's probably a real vision, insofar as I've heard it clearly. There's always that. And I've had other experiences like that too. There are a number of sort of guiding things like that in my life that when I come up against certain moments of navigational errors, I can go, this really clear vision came, and I'm not saying it came from God. I'm going to, as an adult, take responsibility for considering this information and seeing whether there's wisdom or not in it. So apophaticism and this skepticism towards mystical encounter does not keep us from receiving helps. In my opinion, it preserves the sacred nature of helps and keeps us from misinterpreting helps. And two, I'll get these for other people sometimes. And almost exclusively, I never tell them at all that it came from a vision or a voice or something. I just don't even tell them that. I just say, once in a while I've told people, I know we're apophatic about visions, but dude, I heard this directly. But I would only tell that to a person who understood apophaticism and understood that nothing any human being says has the divine seal of authority. So the last thing I want to say about that is that if I'm talking to Christians, this isn't as relevant. If I'm talking to people coming from the New Age, it might be quite relevant. I've met a lot of people who went to a psychic and were told something very specific from that psychic that was wrong. And you could say this is the fault of the listener. I think it's the fault of the listener and the psychic both. The psychic is saying, look, this is a direct message from, I channel Michael, like Archangel Michael or whatever, right? This guide Omar or whatever. I channel this. And they were told something very specific about their life that never ever did pan out, but that they waited on and didn't choose any other things for years because they couldn't get this message that was given the weight of prophecy unlodged from their mind. And it's been tragic. Just one example that just dropped in to say is like this woman I know that was told her husband would divorce her or leave her or cheat on her. Something really tragic would come. And she just lived in this place of doubt forever, and it never unfolded. I mean, yeah, I guess it could still happen. They're like 55 years old, though. So, 25, 30 years of nothing happening, waiting for that shoe to drop because they believed it. That psychic sort of claim of authority lodges itself in the brain very differently than just a suggestion from a wise friend. So I think even when we're receiving these things, we should be somewhat careful not to give it the divine seal of authority and approval, so that people can be free to think for themselves and discern for themselves and trust their own way of navigating through life rather than following the direction of another person in this sort of magic way. Okay, so I'm going to check my notes for a split second. That's good enough. So I hope that really helps for this video. This is, number 2. This is What About Dreams and Visions 2. So if you didn't watch 1, watch 1. It explains the foundations much better. And I hope that really clears it up for anyone that has any misunderstanding at all. If you are intuitive, you go ahead and keep on being intuitive. But watch what happens. The people I know that are highly psychic, that's their type, when they adopt apophaticism, they tell me it's much better. It's so much better to not give any of that the seal of divine authority. And also they say that some of it goes away, but in a good way. And that's another thing, if you believe you're talking directly to God and that's the way to navigate, then you're always asking and looking. And you got your antennas up all the time in this way that is immature. And so what people say is this calms, and a deeper kind of way of being led by God begins to emerge that doesn't require messages, visions, dreams. It can be supplemented by or not, but the unfolding happens anyway, with or without all those other things. So I hope this is very helpful. Please, if you're from my group, like that video and go like all my other videos. And I do take donations, so below in the description there'll be a way to go to like Venmo or PayPal. And thank you all very much.